Let's talk a little bit about olives. Now, most of the, or at least a lot of the olive harvest is pressed into oil. So we should have a basic understanding of the gradations of olive oil. Just like coffee and wine, a large fraction of the output is commodity grade, but there are ways to appreciate and enjoy the better versions. The first pressing, which once was a mechanical press but now more often a centrifuge, is called virgin olive oil. Kind of a weird word, I know, but that's what it is. To extract more oil from the remaining olives, they've got to be heated. If you've ever spread maybe Nutella on a slice of toast, making me hungry, you've noticed it'll get softer with a bit of heat. Olive oil is similar. A bit of heat will make it more liquid, but at the cost of cooking the oil, driving off many of the volatiles that give it that great flavor. So once you understand that, then it's also evident there's no point in using the good stuff if you're going to cook it. And if you want to fry up some onions, delicious, just sliced really thin, fried in olive oil till crisp. You don't need quality oil. Save the good stuff for eating where you can appreciate the flavors. It's also why you want to keep your oil in a cool place out of the light. Sometimes it's sold in a can just to keep the light away. Sometimes oil is labeled cold press, which is exactly so that the volatile aromas are not cooked off. But let's see, getting back to the pressing the olives to get the oil, this squeezes out both oil and water, but in old times they'd let it sit for a bit of time to separate, just like maybe you've seen salad dressing do that. The oil rises to the top. Nowadays, again, it's often centrifuged out. They don't want to wait. The extra virgin olive oil, so-called, is lower in acid and considered the best tasting. Opposite that, lampante, which has a lot more acidity. Not necessarily what you would want. The word would literally mean you'd use it for lamps, burn it for light or heat. Yeah. After the olives are pressed and heated, the remaining paste is called pomace. It's still got a bit of oil left in it, which can be recovered with chemical solvents. This graph shows the prices for different grades of oil over time in euro per 100 kilogram. This shows prices in 4 countries: Italy, Greece, Spain, and Portugal. The Italian prices before 2020 showed the most seasonality. But the big action is over on the right-hand side, where olive prices have nearly doubled from around 400 to 800. Price rises from lower harvests. Inward shift of the supply curve leads to a rise in the price. It's an open discussion about how much of the lower harvest is due to climate change. This shows prices for the different grades of oil. For Spain, since other countries don't report quite as many, we can see the prices are sort of surprisingly similar, perhaps. Now, there's some investment in olive groves as different funds look for sustainable alternative investments. We'll talk more about ESG investing and that kind of thing, or environmental investing. You probably heard it in the news in various ways. A lot of farms are considering a move to organic methods with some sort of external certification that they're kind of doing it right. But why would they have external certification? Why not just internal claims? Or we can ask, why would internal claims be downweighted? Well, the answer is credibility. Credibility is really important. Many sellers make any wide variety of claims. They might say it's natural. More recently, it seems like just everything sold is now with AI, because that's cool. Whatever the current buzzword, every product might get labeled that. And in theory, these should not have very large effects. I mean, why? Well, suppose it did. Suppose there were some magic word that when inserted into marketing copy would increase what consumers are willing to pay. Then, obviously, every seller would do that, and there'd quickly be nothing to distinguish one from another. Now, that's not quite inevitable. This is a theoretical extreme in the actual world, but there is ample confusion. For instance, in the US, the label organic can only be used if a food is certified to be organic and demonstrate compliance with a whole bunch of different rules. Well, the word natural is pretty much completely unregulated. In the phrase from our talk about wines, the word natural as applied to food is bullshit. Now, decades ago, when states were setting regulations about food labeling, some states, notably California, considered organic and natural to both imply the same sets of restrictions. But when the federal government took over regulations to set a uniform national standard, they decided to only regulate the term organic, but allowed the term natural to be more broadly used. And now, indeed, surveys of consumers show that people's willingness to pay, their WTP, is higher for both terms. It seems that many consumers are kind of confused about what they're actually buying. Now, we should note that, in fact, not every product is labeled even as just natural, so that implies the market might be more segmented. There may very well be some consumers who would be less willing to pay even for a product labeled as natural. People are complicated. Getting back to olive oil market, it's had a number of scandals over the years, demonstrated that the labeling of different olive oil gradations is not quite what we'd want. There are obvious incentives for producers to take cheap stuff, put a label on it, which would mean it can sold for a higher price, which is, one of the advantages of government regulations just in terms of consumer protection. Economists refer to this as the lemon problem after a paper by George Akerlof. A lemon is an English slang term for something of poor quality. I guess it leaves a sour taste in your mouth, at least metaphorically. So suppose there were just two grades of olive oil, the low-quality Lampante, which consumers would pay X dollars for, and the extra virgin olive oil, the EVOO, for which consumers would pay Y dollars. If a consumer isn't sure whether they're getting the good stuff or the bad stuff, then they'd assign a probability P for actually getting the good stuff. And so even if they were not at all risk averse, they'd be willing to pay just P times the difference in price. But if many of the high quality producers aren't willing to sell at that lower price, then fewer will offer their high quality output for sale. So consumers would be willing to pay even less, and so forth until there's only low quality stuff for sale in the market. So regulations that guarantee quality can actually make consumers better off because it allows them to pay more and get more. They're willing to pay more because they're confident that they'll get more, they'll get that higher quality. This can apply to olive oil or used cars, which was Akerlof originally gave an example, or lots of other things, healthcare, things where there is asymmetric information, where the quality is really difficult to assess. Anyway, with all this discussion about changes in willingness to pay, we would like to have estimates of how large or small these changes really are. And that's the concept of elasticity, which we'll be discussing next.